we're going to go around and do quick introductions, and then we will jump into our presentation, and then allow some time at the end for just some general feedback and risk associated with the schedule. So I am Bob Bales, Executive Director of Secondary Curriculum Instruction and Academic Programming, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Trice.
So good afternoon, Rodney Trice, Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, Equity and Engagement. And I'll turn it over to Mary Rogers.
Hi, I'm Mary Rogers. I am the Secondary Director of Mathematics.
And I am Matt Cohn. I'm the district's teacher on special assignment.
All right. We have Mary and Matt on here today just to be able to help us navigate just doing an online format. I know this is, somewhat remembrant of our COVID days, but we wanted to provide an opportunity for parents who may not work at a regular 9-to-5 position and wanted to still be able to listen in and give some feedback. So Mary's going to be capturing some of the feedback that you have, and Matt's going to help make sure that we're able to navigate our chat. So I want to just thank them too for helping us out. And we'll go ahead and pull up our presentation deck and we'll go ahead and get started. So once again, this is our high school schedule assessment, our parent feedback session. We're also going to have another one on April 29th, 2024 at Carborough High School. And the information has been sent out about that already. Next slide. Again, welcome. We can go to the next slide too. So we always want to start out with, understanding that as we move through anything, we have our core values that we follow here at the district, which revolves around wellness, engagement, social justice, action, joy, and collective efficacy. And that throughout the last couple of years with our strategic plan, we've been tasked with thinking and acting differently, and that's exactly what we are doing currently. Next slide. So this is a timeline of kind of our work over the past few months. This has been shared on our public webpage, but this takes us all the way back from our guiding committee kickoff, and we even have some more information on things that happened before then, all the way up to now, where we're gathering some public feedback, and then being able to share that back with our district and school administrators. So, going all the way back to August. August is when our board directed our district administration to begin the study of an alignment of high school schedules. Within that, we discussed the scope of the work with Trigo Ed in September and October around having an outside entity come in and facilitate that process to ensure that there was no bias that we had as we were moving forward. We reached out to schools to give us some stakeholders to ensure that they each had representation on the guiding committee. We had our first guiding committee meeting in November. We were able to discuss the project scope, their responsibility, and actually go through the process with them as well to be able to help them see and understand what we were going to be doing with our teachers and the process moving forward. So in December, and I'm going to, Dr. Sipes, our Trigo representative, met with each of the high schools for a full day each, where we asked teachers to come in during their planning periods to give feedback on the advantages and the limitations or barriers to their current schedule, as we're looking for that aligned schedule. This information, if you're interested, is shared on the guiding committee or with the guiding committee, and it's also published on the Chapel Hill webpage. Dr. Sipes returned back to us in January for a half day each to gather input from our students on what they like, what they would like to see in their change in their schedules. He then visited our central office for a couple hours to meet with groups to discuss the advantages and limitations of the schedule. And as you all know, a parent survey was sent out to parents to choose which limitations, barriers that teachers, staff had most agreed with. We really wanted to, raise up the voice of our teachers and allow them to, be able to give those guidelines that our parents then went through and looked at. So again, all of this information is and was shared on the webpage. So in February, our work really started to kick up a little bit. So the guiding committee met and reviewed all the stakeholder data, whether that was teachers, administrators, the parent feedback. When we did that, we realized as a committee that it was important to pinpoint some additional feedback specifically from students who may be most impacted by a schedule change. There was decided that we wanted to go into our AVID, ML, and newcomer programs within all of our 612 schools to really be able to dive personal level. What are the parts of school that you find most enjoyable? How might the schedule be able to ensure that these parts of school stay in place? What are the parts of school that you find most difficult? And how might the schedule be able to address the problems that you mentioned? As we moved on to March, the guiding committee met and determined the key criterion for which we would evaluate each of the alternatives against. So this took into account that additional feedback and all of the feedback that we had previously. We went through the criterion and eventually we ranked them. Our community walks were completed in the Colony Woods and South Estes neighborhood that continue to gather some more feedback from students and families, especially those who may be most impacted by that schedule. Eventually, the guiding committee worked in March to evaluate the 12 different schedules that have been collectively decided on against the criterion that the group had also determined. The schedules weren't necessarily ranked against each other, so we didn't have, here's the Chapel Hill schedule versus the Carrboro schedule versus the East schedule. Let's figure out which one is best. But from scratch, really, and trying to figure out which schedule, as we're looking at, met the needs of the community based on the feedback that we received. Again, that information is shared on our website. We're already into April, and this April, district leadership, so myself and Dr. Trice, spent about 3 to 4 hours at each of our high schools after they had received, kind of how each of the alternatives ranked against the criterion. So we answered questions and gathered additional feedback based on the risk, in particular those that may not have been captured previously, just like we're doing today here with parents. District instructional leadership met with EC and ML leadership to discuss potential risk with each of the schedules and general feedback that was shared with the guiding committee as well. And then just last week, our guiding committee met for the last time to review feedback gathered and determine the risk of each of the schedules. The risks were then evaluated on how likely they're going to occur and the seriousness if they did. This allowed the committee to review the rankings previously completed and decide if the risk would impact where they ended up. So as if you've looked online previously, you might see a schedule that had a higher score. Those risks really help determine if that should be moved up or down based on the risks that we had looked at. So the guiding committee landed on several options we'll ultimately send to the school and district leadership to determine the feasibility of, to eventually send on to the Board of Education. This report will be published on the website when we receive it. We're expecting to receive it early to mid this week so that we'll be able to share what the guiding committee determined as risk for each schedule and to see where everything will kind of laid out. So just again, as a reminder, that guiding committee, they had a lot of work this year. They met for 10 full days over the course of the school year. That group consisted of parents, students, counselors, teachers, school and district administration. It was very important for us to have an outside person that was able to help facilitate the conversation. And remembering too that it was truly a facilitation. There was no necessarily data that was collected numerically wise to determine like this is a schedule that Trigo decided that they wanted. It was our guiding committee that made that determination. Experts in the process. So if you do know someone who's on the guiding committee, please feel free to reach out to them to just be able to talk to you through, what a full 10-day process would actually look like. And they were able to keep the pulse of the work. So we did want to take a couple of minutes defining a couple of things within the schedule. So if you're able to look at them, get a better idea of what they are. So we have a 4x4 block, and within a 4x4 block, we have students that would take 4 classes each semester. So they would only have 4 classes each semester for a total of 8 within a given school year. On an AB block, we have students that rotate between 4 classes each day. So they would have their A classes on, let's say, Monday, and then on Tuesday, they would have their B classes, and then they would see their A classes and B classes again on Wednesday and Thursday. And those classes rotate throughout the entire school year. A combination block with basically a combination of the two. Students have 4 blocks of time each day. And for some of those blocks, they may take a class in the first semester and then a class in the second semester. And then for a different block, they may alternate between that A and B classes for the entire school year. When we have skinnies, it's somewhat similar to your AB type of schedule, except that you have each class every day. It's just for a smaller amount of time. So you would take that block and you would divide it into two, and you would see each of those classes for the smaller amount every day throughout the entire school year. We have a smart lunch. Students basically have an additional time to their lunch where they are able to eat lunch, but then also flex as needed. So you might have an hour and 15 minutes. Go get some extra help and those other things. And then lastly, our flex period. Flex is that time for students to participate with and work with teachers, time to study, get some SEL in, relearn, remediate, reassess, etc. It really gives students a lot of options during those flex periods. So again, we are going to be asking you guys to access the chat feature within this piece, and Mary and Matt are going to help facilitate this as well. We're asking for specific feedback on schedules. So as parents have had the opportunity to look at schedules, if there are risks that you feel come with a particular schedule, we would like you to put that in the chat. And then just general feedback for school and district-based administration as we are looking at moving forward and making a final decision on some recommendations. So this is your time as parents now to kind of add some of those risks into the chat feature. And if there are any general questions that we can help answer, we can possibly do.
So Dr. Bales, we're just getting the first one here. It asks from Melissa, what were the key risks called out for the various schedules?
And both me and Dr. Trice will be popping in and out of some of these questions. So I would say the key risk for some of these, just a lot of it when we looked at student feedback was on needing some flexible time. And if we don't provide that within a schedule, what are the ramifications that come of that? A lot of our students, are very stressed. They need some of that flex time. They need some time to just, do the work that's being expected of them. So, that was something that we kind of saw really rise to the occasion, rise up to the top as we were looking through things. But I'll let Dr. Trice add anything else that he may want to include.
Sure. I think another risk that came up with the various schedules is time for teacher teams to meet. That's very important for planning purposes, for various courses, but also to kind of professional development along with colleagues. And so if you look at the various schedules and districts can use that time to ensure, for instance, that all the biology teachers can meet together, or all the math teachers can meet together. So each of those, like I said, each of the schedules kind of give and take away from one's ability to do that.
In a second, we'll get to a pair of questions about AP classes, but let's start with a shorter one, which asks, would all classes really be about 90 minutes long?
So I would say, depending on the model that's eventually chosen, if it was any sort of a block, whether it be an AB or it be a hybrid or a 4x4, those would all be 90 minutes. It's kind of that 90-minute block time to figure out what it's going to be during that time, whether it's snow or if it's going to be an alternating day or skinny. But that's what those schedules will look like. There's other options out there that were trimester, that were 65 minutes. There was a couple of block options that had fewer minutes. I think one of them may have been 75 to 80 minutes. But there was a variety throughout the number of different schedules.
And I think related to that, that was also a risk that came up, kind of going back to the previous question. If we do go toward a block schedule that requires 80 to 90 minutes, teachers express the need to be supported in terms of how to teach during larger blocks of time.
The first of the questions that focuses on AP classes asks about whether we're going to be increasing from 7 courses to 8 and whether that will put more pressure on students to take more AP courses and in effect hurt electives because electives won't be weighted in the same way that APs are.
So I would say with that, a couple of the schedules did have an increase from 7 to 8 courses over the course of the year. Talking with other in terms of like what does that entail for some students. So for some students, I do wonder in our district, and this was something that the committee did talk about, was, would that encourage students to take more AP classes? That could be. Some other districts that we've spoken with have actually talked about an increase in their CTE and their arts programs because it kind of frees up an additional period for a student to do something that they may not have thought that they could fit in their traditional schedule that they had.
The next question focuses on the 4x4 block and what that would mean for AP exam prep, as well as for sequential courses where a student might have up to a year off in between courses.
Yeah, that's a great question, especially given a high percentage of our students, high school students, enroll in AP courses, and so it's true that a 4x4 block, as traditionally implemented, does not align with the AP testing calendar. And for those parents who don't know, AP tests are typically given in the spring, but if you complete your first AP course by, let's say, December or January timeframe, then you have a large block of time between when a student completed the course, the AP assessment takes place. And so, that's a risk that we certainly talked about as a guiding committee. We also kind of looked at the data from surrounding school districts who are on a block, who also have a high percentage of their students, enrolling in AP courses. And, there are certainly schools that outperform ours in some cases. We outperform others in other cases. And we've also been in contact with the sponsors of the AP exam, and they have specific guidance where they'll come to your district if you're moving to a block schedule to kind of help think about how we provide the best environment for our students to prepare for AP exams. But, we've seen data, and I think there's also data on the College Board website that kind of speaks to, block scheduling and overall, do schools and districts typically see dips? And, we have not found any evidence out there that we an achievement on AP exams. I don't know if you have anything you would add to that, Dr. Bass.
No, I would just say, I think the data, we have some that are a little higher, that are on block schedules. We have some that are a little lower. I think a lot of it, really goes into what's that context. I would also say that's probably why our guiding committee, leaned a little bit towards more of the combination, because it kind of gives some flexibility for district and school leaders to determine what classes may be ones that need to meet more frequently over the course of the year, and I mean more frequently, but more often.
I think you may have just answered the next question, but I still want to throw it out there in case there's something else that comes to mind. Person says, at quick glance, I didn't see the impact on AP classes considered in point ranking. Just saw the CTE certification. Was this considered as taking an AP test months after course ends or covering the material in just a few months before an exam?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that, in every guiding committee meetings that we had, there was conversation around AP testing and the impacts that it would have, because, we do control, when we can give an exam, when we're able to give an end of course exam. the AP is the one that we're just not as able to be as flexible.
There's a question here about flex time and whether students were surveyed about the frequency with which they'd like it. Once a week, twice a week, every day?
Yeah, I would say like there was not a full blown survey to every single student, but for some of our students that we had reached out to, within our community walkthroughs or some of our focus groups, I would say there was a far majority, if not 90%, that wanted a flex every single day. And we brought that information back to our guiding committee, and it was, I want to flex every day, and I want to be able to, truly be flexible with it, not let it be something that's going to be assigned to me every single day. I need time to do work. I need time just to breathe. I need time to read. As we know, some students that are very taxed with, whether it be athletics after school, an additional job, taking care of siblings, being able to have some time in the day where they could stop and breathe and kind of gather themselves and plan what they need to do was brought up numerous.
Second comment is concern about whether teenagers have the attention span to last past 60 minutes. I don't know if you all want to comment on either of those.
Yeah, I would say, with our attention span, I think part of that is, it's what we condition our students to do too. I mean, we have our elementary kids who some may argue would have even less attention span, that do 2-hour reading blocks on a consistent basis every single day. I know, within what we have, there's always a point where somebody, is going to, fall off a little bit in terms of their attention span. I think that's, one of the great things with teachers. They know when that is. They can help plan, like, okay, I need to get them up and move around and do something different. I need to, do a walk and talk where we're still learning, but we're just going to walk around the hallways. I'm going to give a bathroom break. All of those types of things that help, break up any time frame.
Yeah. But to be sure, students had concerns about being lectured to for 90 minutes. When we were doing some of our focus groups, that would be fine for some teachers, but for other teachers, it wouldn't be, so great. And so I think that's where the importance of, if the board decides to move in the direction where we're, having larger blocks of time for instruction, that we provide our teachers with models of instruction, a way that you kind of engage in short bursts, but also keep novelty in the classroom where students are doing different things throughout the 90 minutes. And so, or whatever, block of time that they have. I know that there was another portion to that question.
Yeah, so the two comments, the second one had to do with whether teenagers have the attention span for 60 minutes, and then the other person was just saying they liked the notion that some courses could last half a year, others for the full year.
Got it.
There are a few questions here that deal with timing, so I think two clearly go together. I'm concerned that if you have a 4x4 block schedule, the second semester will get shortchanged because there will be fewer weeks from the beginning of the semester until the AP test. And so there's a question as to whether the district would have the freedom to start the school year earlier so that by the December holiday, the first semester would be wrapped up.
Yeah, we don't currently have the authority to start the school year earlier than we do, but I know that there are some adjustments that we can make internally to our calendar where we could perhaps balance first and second semester more. That's a topic that came up during the guiding committee discussions as well. We have teachers who've taught in block schedules in other districts, and raise that concern that second semester can kind of get cheated out of instructional time. But even some of our teachers provided some insight in terms of how districts or schools can move together to rectify some of that. And I think also that kind of speaks to the type of planning that would need to be involved between district administrators and school leaders if this decision is made to move in that direction, to get that kind of set ahead of time. And that's why we wanted to incorporate before implementation, where we can kind of dig into some
You
of
just
these
talked about a
risks.
year's worth of planning. There's a person who wonders if there's an opportunity to pursue year-round schooling in our district, given the fear about learning losses and the discontinuity if you take Spanish 3 in the fall of one year and Spanish 4 in the spring of the next year.
Yeah, that was beyond the scope of the guiding committee. But I know that, there have been some discussions on year round and the impact on, that would have with our students. And, the board, I don't think is in a space where they're kind of considering that right now, but perhaps something in the future that we could unpack. But that was beyond the scope of what we're looking at with this assessment.
There are a few questions about, kind of whose interests were at the heart of this. So one question asks about the extent teachers' concerns were considered, and another says, were students with IEPs or 504s factored into any of this analysis, or was the analysis based on the
Yes, I can talk about the
average
IEPs and
student
504s.
students
That
who
was
take
definitely
AP honors
some
class?
internal conversation with this between district leadership in terms of working with our EC department to talk through some of the schedules and talk through like what are some of the risks that may come on forward. I will say for our guiding committee, one of our top criterion was making sure that we were building a schedule that was suitable for school dependent learners. So our students that really depend on the parameters within the school. So that could be a student with an IEP, a 504. Also knowing that we need to provide time that not everyone can afford to go out and hire a tutor for a class. Might not have the opportunity at the after school is actually out to be able to actually go to a tutor. So that school dependent learner was, I will say it was a 10. I'm not sure if it was our top 10 or if it was a 10, just in general, but it was definitely something that was, brought up over and over and over again, especially for our students that just needed that additional support from the school.
And I would also add that, because this touches every student and every teacher, it was important to kind of get a broad cross section of feedback. And this is one of the first times that that I've been involved with in a deep analysis where you found some synergy between various types of students in terms of being totally overwhelmed at school. And I know as a community, we've talked for some time about the mental health and wellness and students being able to, effectively carry the load, academic load that we have. But also, many of our students play sports or are involved with clubs or other, civic engagements outside of school. And, so that was also very much a part, of our assessment to make sure that the scope of, students that we have in our community had voice in this process. But it was pretty consistent that something needs to be done to alleviate the feeling of being overwhelmed with homework and other tasks associated with school, but also activities outside of school.
Mr.
Speaking of
Gunn,
activities, oh, sorry.
Did you have another part of that about teachers? I didn't know if we caught that piece.
I think Dr. Trice addressed
Okay.
it, but just how were the concerns of teachers factored into this?
Yeah, I think an important piece for us was to make sure that, we actually had face-to-face time with teachers to have a conversation, and not just, one of those open surveys. And that, parents also know that when we sent out the survey to them, it wasn't necessarily open-ended. It was like, here's what your teachers have said is, most prioritized for them. Help us rank, from that, where do you find the prioritization in your end? So just wanted to add that piece.
There's a question here about clubs and extracurricular activities, and to what extent did the scheduling committee consider those when coming up with its recommendations? And can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think within that, we definitely wanted the, our students, when they talked about their flex time, that was part of what they were talking about, was, a time to meet with clubs, and try to have some of those extracurriculars that actually end up being during the school day. Of course, that's not going to be everything, but, trying to fit as much into the time that they have in the building so that they were able to do the additional things, whether it be, having that job, being able to go home and help with siblings and such. But it definitely was a piece that was considered as we were looking at all the schedules and how that would impact basically the overall day of our individual students.
The next two questions are smaller in scope. One involves the timing of flex time. When in the day would that occur? And then the other involves the timing of the new schedule. When would this be implemented?
So I'll let Dr. Bell speak to the flex time and time of day, but concerning implementation, if the board chooses to align schedules, I think the first opportunity for that would be at their May 16th board meeting. This will be on the discussion and action agenda item, but it would be for the 25-26 school year. And so we would use the 24-25 school year, next school year, to do all of the planning to make sure that we're mitigating the risks that we identified as a guiding committee, but also, feedback that we're receiving from parents and other community stakeholders. And so we'll spend that year kind of getting ready for the implementation. There's some work that teachers have to do if the board decides to, implement larger blocks of time to, change lesson plans. And, there's just a whole host of things that we'll have to do, which is why I think the process in our district has been, effective in terms of providing opportunity for voice and feedback and, the pace at which, we're moving. I know that some districts will make a decision like this one school year and you're into it the next school year. And we knew right away that that's not a model that we wanted to do. We wanted to make sure that our students and parents and teachers kind of understood the change, but then we're also supporting them through the change as well. Dr. Bells, I don't know if you could speak to when flex time in the various schedules might occur.
Yeah, so definitely that's something that we'd have to make sure is aligned between all of the schools. There was conversations of trying to avoid it being at the beginning or the end of the day, trying not to attach it to lunch unless it was in that smart lunch option. I think they really wanted to make sure that it was a true break in the day and not something that could get attached to something else or something. Oh, I'm just going to head home or I'm coming early. A true time where we could provide a flexible time for students to kind of get what they need during that time. So I think, it would be consistent across all the schools, but I think they truly wanted to make it a time where it was a break in the day and not attached to something else.
Great. The next question, I want to read it in its entirety because I want to make sure I do justice to it. It says, I'm concerned about the risk for those of us who do limit the workload of our students to a reasonable SEL-centered approach, that the ability of students to take 8 AP weighted classes, which will make achieving a class rank, which the state makes mandatory on transcripts, which is comparable to a student's achievement in their chosen coursework, numerically impossible. The additional weighted classes for some students tilts the scales exponentially. Is the district finally going to set a limit on the number of APs one student can take in a year if we go to 8 class slots?
So, I mean, that's a topic that came up quite often in our guiding committee discussions. And one thing that we said we'd do as an administration is to be explicit about incorporating that very issue into our risk analysis for the board. And I know in speaking with Dr. Bales about the scheduling models that kind of rose to the top where students might have the opportunity to take 8 courses, we will express, sentiment around some teachers, some parents wanting to put some parameters around AP courses in our district, and perhaps, encouraging the use of others. And so, parents on the call, you may know that our district requires 22 graduation credits. That's the minimum that the state requires. I think by the time our students graduate, they're taking upwards of, 30 credit hours in many cases. Um, and so, like I said, we'll be sure to kind of, frame that for our board. I'm sure the board is going to have the same concerns, or at least want us as an administration to address that. And they certainly have the capacity to, for instance, limit the number of AP courses that a student can take in a year. And so, we're certainly not, in a position to speak to that, but only the board can. The flip side of, the schedule is that, students who are off track for graduation or move to our district and perhaps they don't, they're under credited. Those types of schedules that allow for 8 courses to be taken across the year provides an extra opportunity for students to catch up, right? And so, there's a balance that we have to kind of look at when we adopt this. One of the scheduling models, for instance, I think uses one of the courses or the blocked courses for intervention. And so there are some districts that will mandate that 8th course is kind of like a flex period. And that's one of the top schedules that the committee landed on. So just to reiterate, we're going to raise that concern with our board. And I know that's something that the board has been concerned about for some time as well.
There's a process question here about the high school scheduling committee. It says, how are the weighting criteria for the various criteria determined? What's a scientific basis for those weightings? They seem arbitrary since they weren't documented publicly, or did I just miss it?
So I would say for each of the criteria that was determined, like it was a conversation with the group as a whole. I mean, every time you see like, here's a ranking in terms of like, we think this criterion is an 8. And then even when we go over to the schedule side of it, and this, schedule meets it, a 6 out of 10. Every time you see a number, that's, a conversation that the guiding committee had and came to consensus on. So, there were hundreds of conversations that happened over the course of those 10 different days. So with that, it's everyone's, background and, what they brought to the table in terms of the basis for those weightings. We also said, you couldn't have everything be a 10. If everything's a 10, nothing's a 10. And we had to have that varying degree of numbers that we had there. And it should be, all of that is published in terms of what the guiding committee, decided on, if that's what is being asked.
There's a note here in the chat about a county that is going to court over the law regarding school calendars. There's a question here about all the acronyms, which we do a lot of in education, and then somebody posted a link that I think addresses that. Here's a concern: the gaps resulting from 4x4 blocks in sequential learning, especially math and world languages, would be significant and affect all students. How is that considered in the ranking of schedules?
So I'll say that, every time, we had a conversation about any sort of a 4x4, that was brought up in terms of the sequencing and, what would that positively or negatively impact. I think it's unfair necessarily to say that it's, going to affect all students. For some students, having that academic break may be beneficial, to have some time where you're really focusing in and then being able to, have a semester where you're not focusing on, a course that you may not necessarily, be the most skilled in. So, it may, absolutely have some impacts on some students. But I would say that our data that we have is, fairly inconclusive that like a gap necessarily hurts students all of the time. But it was definitely something that was continually brought up in our guiding committee.
Here's the last question that remains as of this moment. It asks, are changes to the Bell schedule being suggested in order to try to graduate high school students in 3 years instead of 4 in order to triage the growing teacher shortage?
I don't think that was a consideration that the guiding committee had or the board had. I mean, it is true that the General Assembly and now through the State Board of Education is requiring districts to implement 3-year graduation plans. That's certainly something that our district is looking at. However, I don't think that's anything we would advocate for unless there's a plan put in place where students have and parents have identified exactly what students will do after the 3 years. So, that was not a consideration of ours, though, with this assessment.
As of now, there's nothing more in the chat, but I'm sure there will be soon. Here we go. Respectfully, if summer learning loss is a real thing, then how can a semester off from, say, French not be real?
Like I said, for some students that absolutely is a thing, and then for other kids, having that break can be a benefit to them as well.
Yeah, and some of the research that I've seen around summer learning loss is with respect to our lowest achieving students, but students in the midst of a school year still receiving instruction. They're still being challenged in a particular content area. And so, if you're going from Math 1 to Math 2, our curriculum spirals. So there's all kinds of differences between during the year instruction and what we typically, identify as learning loss, where students aren't being engaged academically. I do want to reiterate, we did intentionally look at some of the achievement data from, area high schools with respect to, AP testing and other forms of testing. And, there were instances where schools were on block and they outperformed our high schools and there certainly were others that underperformed us, knowing that we're a very high achieving school district. And so I know that, our teachers, I would put up against, any set of teachers. And I'm not just saying that, I'm saying that as a father of, 2 children in the district, one who has since graduated. But that also kind of speaks to whatever decision that the board makes. We want to make sure that our teachers are supported and they feel supported. And so, if we get a decision, soon, we'll want to go back to teachers to also unpack and make sure the type of support that they need that we're able to provide at a very high level throughout the course of next year.
There's a parent here who comments that they like that the 4x4 option would allow students who have already taken care of the prerequisites to move ahead. And so they hope that we don't limit the number of APs. There's another parent who wonders if we want to raise our concerns about some of the findings and rankings of these schedule options, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of ways. You can certainly send concerns to Dr. Bells and I. We're taking as much feedback as we can get. And we'll make sure that we share that with the board. But as a community member, you also have the option of directly emailing our board. Additionally, on May 2nd, we'll be hosting a public hearing on the high school schedule assessment. The board will not be making a decision on May 2nd. They'll receive an update from Dr. Bells and I. They'll receive all the information that the guiding committee collected over the course of the year. And then the board will begin to kind of, go through the data to kind of inform their decision. But at the May 2nd board meeting, is an opportunity to share concerns or support with the board. And then the May 16th meeting, I believe the 16th is a Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, that'll be the first time that the high school schedule assessment will be on the discussion and action agenda. And what that means for our parents is that the board could decide to adopt a particular schedule at that meeting, or the board could decide, thank you for doing this assessment. We're not going to change. We're just going to, stay as is. Or they can say, you know what, we'll kick this down the road and, we'll discuss it at our next meeting. And so, those are the opportunities that I think parents, and not just parents, but students, teachers, anyone can comment on the process, what they feel is important. And I know that our board appreciates that. The more folks that we can hear from, the more information they have. I think it sets them up to make the best informed decision that they can.
Someone in the line noted that the 4 principals at the high school level have all been hired relatively recently. And they ask, have we considered giving those principals an opportunity to try to work with the current system and any changes they might want to make for a full year before making the schedule change?
Yeah, I would talk to that just in the fact of, whatever decision, if a decision is made to go to a different schedule, we do have a full year to, work with principals, provide professional development modules, whatever it is, to help facilitate the move to whatever the board, potentially decides on. So it does give, principals that time to be able to, collaborate together and collaborate with district leadership to, ensure that change in the 25-26 school year goes successfully.
There's a request for clarification around flex time, just that it really will be flexible, that students will be able to kind of work in clubs, do retests, intervention, study time. Will that hold true for flex time at all the schools?
Yeah, that's our intent, and one reason we want to bring principals together if the board makes this decision, because, even for our teachers and hearing from some of them during the feedback sessions and even during the guiding committee sessions, sometimes they're using their lunch or planning periods to do retesting or tutoring students. And so, I think while students ask for flex time, I think it will also help some of our teachers recoup some of that downtime or the time they need for planning purposes so that they can prepare for our students. And so that was really high on the list, for a lot of our different stakeholders.
There's a question here. It says, the survey sent out to parents about this topic was acknowledged to be poorly written, and yet a revised survey wasn't sent out as families were initially told it would. Will there be any additional survey of parents and students to directly solicit the community sentiment about the issue? I don't see any direct measure of community preferences in this survey data.
Yeah, so I would just echo what Dr. Trice had shared earlier in terms of, the various ways that you can continue to give feedback, and, whether that's with myself, Dr. Trice, like this, the information that we gather now is going to be shared with our school leaders as we look at, the potential risk of each individual schedule. One of the feedback points that we received as well from parents is they just really wanted to know, like, what are the schedules so that we can really compare them. When we have reached out previously with the survey, we didn't have a list of, like, here's the schedules that we're going to look at, here's the criterion that we weighted them against. And it, unless you were extremely informed and, knew a lot of these pieces outside of, what you'd been hearing, you may not have been able to have as much information as you're able to have at this point with all of the different reports that TrigoEd's been able to give us.
And I know that our communications office has been intentional about sharing the information community-wide as we get it from our partners. And, I think the risks is kind of the last piece of information, the risks associated with each schedule, that as soon as we receive that as a district, we'll make sure we flip it to parents and others. But it's important to kind of see where the various alternative schedules kind of fell out in terms of the rating from the guiding committee. And then you can see, you will be able to see what the guiding committee teachers at each of our campuses, you'll be able to see the risks associated with each. And then there are some notes with some of the schedule models that, if a slight change would occur, it would make it more attractive. So for instance, I think there's a schedule that has 92 minutes associated with it per block. Well, the board could decide to say, instead of 92 minutes, we're going to do 85-minute classes. And that extra class, the extra time that we take off the class periods, we're going to attach it to flex time or something like that, which would give students more lunchtime and more time to receive support, do retakes, receive tutoring, those types of things, interact with friends, the types of things that students said that they wanted to do. So we'll make sure that, we update that, the community as soon as we have it. But I want to remind our community that you'll have it by May 2nd. And the first opportunity that the board will have to make a decision on it is May 16th. And so there has to be kind of like this dedicated kind of reading and diving in period between those two dates, if you want to provide input on any particular model or the process. If the board kicks it down the road to a different meeting, meaning the decision, that's just additional time that you'll have to kind of ingest everything. I think Dr. Bells and I anticipate that the final report will be over 100 pages. So, we want to make sure that, the community is aware that it'll be pretty extensive, and we'll take some time to kind of digest.
There's a parent who wants to know if there's a chance that the board could opt to just keep things the way they are in terms of the schedules.
I would say, yeah, that's definitely, the board ultimately gets to make the decision, if they want to move on to a different schedule, if they want, like Dr. said a couple different times, if we just want to stay pat, we need more information, but that definitely is something that the board could do.
Parent says they understand that teachers teach 5 classes for their contracted salaries and can earn a supplement if they teach a 6th. Will that supplement continue if we change to a block schedule?
So I don't think that, so teachers receive a supplement for teaching classes where we have not identified a teacher and they're agreeing to take on a period. If that were to happen in a block schedule format, I know that that's a strategy that the district has used to, encourage or entice teachers to take on additional periods if we are not able to find teachers to teach. I would imagine that, teachers will probably be less inclined to take on an additional, load if it is under a block scheduling model. But if things hold as they are now, I think our employment rate, I think, is in the high 90%. And so we anticipate that, that would hold, under a different schedule as well.
There's a parent with that question about the combo schedule, wants to know, would the courses that are meeting for the year meet for just one period, while the ones that meet for a semester meet for two, or would the semester courses just be shorter?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to look at that is that there's 4 blocks of time in a given day, and that a student would decide within that block whether they take a semester-long class, so that they would take one class during that block of time the first semester, and then a different one the second semester. If within that block of time they're going to, choose 2 classes to take on an A-B alternating period, where like one day you'll have, your A class, the next day your B. And then lastly would be that skinny piece where you would take that block of time, you divide it by 2, and you would take each of those smaller classes every single day throughout the entire school year, depending on, which options they had. We wouldn't necessarily say that every class would be available to be taught in all 3 of those models, and depend on which, what works best for the school as we're moving forward with that. But you really need to look at it in terms of like there's 4 blocks of times, and there's different things to do within each of those blocks of time.
Sticking with the combo schedule for just a second, there's a parent who wants to know how it would work if a student wants to take more APs than semester-long courses. For example, would some students end up with 4x4 schedules, while others at the same school would just take more classes each semester?
So I think with that, it depends on the schedule that you're looking at. So, if there is an ability, and it really depends on, well, just maybe the options we share out, you may have a class that is only able to be offered on, an AB blocks type of a schedule, or is only able to be offered on a semester schedule. So we're able to maximize our teachers and be able to navigate that with them in terms of making sure that they're not on multiple different preps. Well, I know it seems in theory that teaching the same class on 3 different types of preps would be okay. If you taught something on a skinny, you taught on a semester block and an AB, it's really 3 different pacings that you have to navigate.
There's a question here about teaching load. Would it be the case that some teachers would teach 3 classes in one semester and 2 in the other, or how would that work?
Yeah, I think so. That is a bit of a master scheduling question as well, meaning like we have the larger structure of, if we're talking about block periods, 4x4, but associated with that, every, winter, we begin to kind of go into a process where students are selecting courses for the new year. And so what teachers are teaching and how many sections and those types of things are often driven by, what students sign up for. So it's kind of difficult to say now kind of what teachers will be teaching. I think the best answer from my perspective would be that you may have some teachers that are teaching 3 periods, and we need to look at, what other needs there are in the school that a teacher could pick up. But it's just kind of tough to do that without, having the full complement of, courses that we need to offer as a district when students sign up for courses. Dr. Bells, I don't know if you would add anything else to that question.
I think like you said, it's dependent on which schedule we're looking at in terms of what the teaching load would necessarily be. That's about as best I can add on to that.
2 questions about AP classes. I'll just go with the first one alone. What percentage of Chapel Hill students take AP classes?
Yeah, that's information I'll have to kind of get back. I'm not sure. The percentage of students that take at least one AP course, I'm not sure that I know that data off the top of my head. I would imagine that it's pretty high, but I would have to check.
The next question says, how do you do an AP block in the fall but can't take the AP test until May?
You know, that's a common, we spoke to that a little earlier, that, you know, that it can be done. I mean, you know, most high schools across, public high schools across the country, you know, that's what they do. But to be perfectly fair, there are some models that we have in our plan where some AP courses may be taken all year, depending on which model is selected. And so, you know, there are examples of high schools that, you know, some AP courses are taken, you know, on the semester basis, and students take the assessment in the fall. And as I mentioned earlier, we've not seen any definitive data that there's this precipitous fall off in achievement when that happens. You know, certainly, you know, we want to make sure that, you know, if a student is taking a course in the fall and needs to take this assessment in the spring, that, you know, if students feel like they need additional support and help in structured spaces to kind of revisit some of the content, you know, that's where that flex time becomes really important. But, you know, there are, you know, spaces in what's been proposed for, you know, some of our AP courses to be taken across the year. For the whole year, I guess I should say.
We don't have any new questions in the chat right now.
Okay.
Oh, I say that and then immediately I'm contradicted. But that's good. We have a good audience here.
Yes.
Let's see, next question. The 7-period traditional schedule gives 145 hours of instructional time, whereas the top scoring Bell schedule only offers 112 hours. This doesn't appear good for students in terms of learning content. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I would say with that, you know, that goes into the professional development and training that you would have with teachers in terms of, you know, are there areas that we can cut out of content that isn't necessarily core, you know, looking at our pacing. Also knowing within that, you know, I believe the schedule that they may be referring to also adds in an additional class. So when you add in an 8th class, it's, you know, by math, it's going to, you know, drop every class down a little bit. So it's really that trade-off of, you know, giving students more opportunities to take additional classes versus, you know, limiting their classes from 8 to 7.
Next comment. I keep thinking schools won't be able to fully offer all programming for the full course catalog they currently offer if they have to balance a complex block or partial block schedule. This would mean students couldn't get their preferred classes. Can you comment on that possibility or risk?
So I would say within that, like, again, I think every schedule has a little different idiosyncrasy in terms of what makes it easier or more difficult. If you're going from a schedule that has, you know, 7 classes currently to a class that has 7 classes and a flex or something of that nature, you're still, you know, having that 7 periods. It's really, you know, it is a little more difficult within the master schedule. You're going to have to pair up classes and say, like, okay, you know, we know that these classes are ones that students, you know, particularly take if they're taking this sequencing. So we're going to offer them on an A/B over the course of this year, or, you know, we're going to make sure that we offer them on different semesters. You know, and that's where a lot of the work and the partnership between district and school administration in terms of how do you partner these up and, you know, try to make sure that everything is getting in place. I mean, if it's 7 periods, regardless, both of them are going to have the same number of openings. It's just depending on how you're able to navigate it and make sure that they open up across the different, you know, blocks that you may have within the building.
You know, I'd also like to comment on if the board decides to align schedules across the high schools, I think it's important for us to kind of study kind of the outcomes over time. We've established criteria that we'd like to see in terms of, outcomes and that type of thing. And so I don't think this is the type of decision that the board will make and, we forget about it. It's going to be important to be sure that, for instance, if our students are expressing that they're totally overwhelmed now, that it's very difficult to complete homework and, those types of things, do we still see students kind of expressing that level of, frustration with their current schedule? If teachers, want more planning or collaborative planning, and we implement a different model, do we see evidence of that happening? And of course, given that the data or the research is pretty inconclusive about, student achievement, we're certainly going to track, student achievement to see, if, there's any, change at all. Currently, you may be aware that one of our high schools is on, a block schedule, and, we haven't seen precipitous drop off in achievement, but we've been purposeful in not, pitting schools against each other in terms of achievement while making this decision, knowing that, the schools are probably more similar than different in terms of achievement and that type of thing. But again, with such a shift in practice, we want to be sure that, we have our eye on the ball with respect to the level at which our students achieve and what our community is accustomed to.
We have a comment here from a person who points out that most district teachers don't live within the district and can't vote in board of elections here, or school board elections here, and so they rely on parents to have their interests at heart. There's a question here that says, beyond the 12 teachers who've been on the committee, what kind of feedback have you received from teachers at Chapel Hill High and East Chapel Hill High who will need to revise their content and ensure that students are able to engage for much longer periods of time?
Yeah, so going back to the original presentation, there's been, I would say formally, there's been at least a day and a half of opportunity for teachers from every school to give their feedback, whether it be through, our Trigo Ed rep. And with those two, we were very purposeful to make sure that it was an opportunity for, teachers to give feedback without feeling like there was someone from central office there. I mean, our Trigo rep was the only person in the room so that, they could give honest feedback there. And then the additional feedback sessions that we've had. And I'll say informally, there's been plenty of conversations amongst, all the different groups that we have, or just when we pop into classrooms, talk with teachers, talk with schools, it's an ongoing conversations of, the unknown for some people, just okay, what is the difference that's going to happen if I have to change my pacing, if I have to, teach a little bit longer. And also knowing too that there's some teachers right now that are in those schools at East and at Chapel Hill that already teach on a block schedule to a degree, and there's continuing classes of we're going to move to that in certain subjects next year. So that feedback has definitely been there, and it's something that me and Dr. Trice have been very purposeful of making sure that we're talking with people. You can send out a survey, but don't understand the true context, and being able to have that face-to-face conversation is helpful as well.
There's a parent who wonders about what the benefits are for aligning the 3 high school schedules. Are you anticipating that there would be many students who would take courses at a different school than their zone 2? And how would those students move quickly between schools? Would district provide the transportation?
Yeah, so I mean that's a great question. So we anticipate that more students would take advantage of the opportunity that can now, because we're on such disparate schedules. And I think beyond that, Dr. Bells and I are working with local community college representatives that will offer additional pathways for students to earn college credit and high school credit, perhaps even to the degree where students can earn associate's degree while in high school and immediately take that work and enroll in a four-year university or some type of career that requires a credential. Currently, our schedules, the way they are now, don't allow for that, and it becomes even tougher if each of our high schools is on a different schedule, which means that our students have inequitable access to those types of opportunities. And so I really appreciate the parents' question because, part of it is, we have to have a structure in place before we can realize our vision. But we're also working as an administration pretty intentionally around kind of building out that vision. With respect to transportation, that's why the flex period and the longer lunch period is so essential, because that's when the bulk of transportation would occur. And that's something that we provide currently, and I know that we would continue to kind of look at that as we become more aligned and our programs open up more to students in other schools. So we wouldn't want to take that away. Dr. Bells, I don't know if you would add anything else to that. I know you've been working with Durham Tech, and they're excited about the various pathways that we can offer our students. About 70% of our students, once are high school graduates, once they complete high school, go off to a four-year university, whether that's public or private. About 30% of our students either enter the military, the workforce, or community college. And so, 30% of our students, could benefit from different pathways with local community college partners, but also many of our students who are enrolled in AP type courses where they have to take the AP assessment at the end of the course might want to reconsider taking a course at a community college because, one, they get the same weight for completing the course, and they don't necessarily have to take the AP test to receive credit. And at least for the North Carolina University system, those courses will automatically transfer to four-year colleges. So there are a lot of benefits that we would have in place with the alignment of schedules, but also strategically partnering with colleges and universities in our area. Just lastly, many parents may know many of our students enroll in UNC Chapel Hill once, for language courses, math courses, and those types of things. And we would still, continue to honor those types of partnerships.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add on real quick in 30 seconds. One thing that we got from our community tours was just the want to be able to help offset some of that cost that comes with going to college, and expanding our community college presence within our schools allows us a lot more flexibility in offering a lot of that to our kids and to our families. We have some kids that are in middle college, which is like the ultimate work with it, and they're graduating high school with 60 credits, 60 college credits, and are half, third to halfway done with their university credits already. So trying to offer that piece up is extremely important for our families as well.
We're going to stick with this thread about attending more than one school. It says if a child starts his day at his home-based school and then goes to another school for classes, how does he return to his home school and or get bused home? The person says, I can't take time off from work to transport midday.
So I think that's, that's a conversation that we're going to have with transportation. In terms of, that's definitely one of the risks that come up with any of the schedules. Also looking at, some of our partnerships that we may have with our community partners in Durham Tech, that may be something where instead of actually having to be bussed off to, Durham Tech, if we have a large enough partnership, it's something where, we see surrounding districts that the teachers are actually coming to the building itself, so there's no transportation even needed. I would just add on to that as well, as we're making this transition, something that we've talked about, exploring as we, grow higher and higher numbers in terms of our cross enrollment students is, do we need to look at asking county commissioners for, a bus that does have that transportation that just continually runs all day long? It's something I think that they would be very interested in, but it's something that, we'd have to show like that there's a need for it as we're continuing to expand.
There's a question, it follows on the point of supporting teachers. Do teachers get to vote on these plans, given that they'll be carrying the load for making these changes happen for our students?
No, I think the board is voting on the scheduling options for students, teachers, central service staff, parents, and the like. We were just responding to the questions, feedback, input, and the board is going to take all of that in and make a decision. Certainly, teachers, played a very big part in terms of, the information we've gathered. As I tell people, you have, teachers on all sides of the issue. Some, are quite excited about it. Others, don't care as much. And then you have teachers who, are opposed to the change for a lot of different reasons. Perhaps they've taught under different models. Perhaps they think that the models will, unfairly impact their content area. But the idea was that we would take all of those concerns and the risks and share them with the board. In addition to, what our students say, it's clear that our students are saying they're overwhelmed, that something has to give. And I know that our board is going to listen to that voice as well. And so it's not an easy decision for our board by any means, but I think my responsibility and Dr. Bales' responsibility was to give them as much information as we could in terms of, where our community landed on the issue, knowing that there are a lot of different sides. We had some students who say, yeah, my 7 period is fine, and others who are saying like, it's not sustainable. And so the board will kind of have to dive into that information. There are certainly some trends that we see. You see the criteria that the guiding committee established, which was based on feedback from teachers, students, and parents. And so the criteria that's most important, we're going to ask the board to lean on that. I think it's going to be important to trust the process in the end that we've gone through. I think there was ample time for people to provide input and voice. But at the end of the day, the board may make a decision. And I also like to say, like, just because the board makes a decision and we change a scheduling model, I think it's our responsibility as an administration to continue to look at and study its implementation. If we try something different and we don't get the results that we anticipate getting, then we'll have to come back and make adjustments. But we'll need to make sure that as an administration and whatever decision that the board makes, that we are also positioning ourselves to, see if we're getting the return on the investments and changes that we're making.
Yep, I'm going to pop in real quick here just because I know that we're 5 minutes over right now, and So I think we're going to do a speed round here. I'm looking at some of the questions and some that I may be able to answer quickly. I'm going to go through. There's a question, is district leadership discussing ways to remove class rank from the transcripts? That's something that we've been working on, but it's also something that's in UNC state policy that we have to continue. But I know that we have been in conversations with people to see, and we're not the only district that would really like to see that change. And we have our Latin honor system. That's another way to make sure that we're recognizing our students as they graduate. Looking at the number of students this year that are cross enrolled. Right now, I don't have the exact number of that, but I will say that I know that it's limited just because we do have schools that are on different schedules. So that was one of the pieces that we needed to kind of look at. And then I saw there's another question. I didn't see the additional questions after that. Question about Carrboro's AP scores on average being lower than their two. Like we said too, like we're trying not to necessarily look at individual schools and say this school is higher or lower. I will say looking at historical data, pre-block, post-block, those every school's data has fluctuated a little bit up and down, and the change to a different schedule hasn't necessarily made an impact up or down either way. And Matt, I'm not sure if we missed any other ones, but
I think you got it all. There's a plea at the end just to really take the process seriously for all the families involved as well.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So I just want to say thank you to all the parents that, showed up, and like, these are really important questions that, make us think. And like I said, we're going to make sure that we reflect these questions and concerns to our board, and, it'll help them make the decision that they, have to make, in the best interests of our students and teachers and community. But again, if you would like to send additional feedback, or if you have additional questions, please feel free to email or call, Dr. Bells and I. We're open and eager to kind of talk through some of this, just to make sure that everyone has the information they need to kind of make an informed kind of thought around what we're doing as a district. And we just want to appreciate you spending time with us today.
And on that, again, I will also just reiterate, thank you all for the very thoughtful questions. Please do reach out, and we will try this again in person next Monday at Carrboro High. Hope everyone has a great rest of your afternoon and day.